a lot of lines. A guy who really loved to put lines on his figures. Um, which, I dig that a lot. Today we were going to take a look at one of my favorite anatomy books of all time. That being said, there is one minor caveat, and that is it's a rather old book, and it has some controversial things in it, things that I do not agree with. We can all agree that racism is not cool. We'll start out by saying that. Obviously, it's not cool. And this book has some very of its time beliefs. I do not agree with these beliefs. But that being said, and that's always what you want to hear when somebody's talking about racism, but that being said, I do think it is still a useful anatomy book, and an anatomy book that I really enjoy from a standpoint of learning anatomy or taking a look at a book to kind of understand what's going on with the body, because there's some interesting stuff in here. Not only do we get things like how muscles connect, but we also get how the body moves. I can understand why this book is definitely not in print, even though I wish that they would reprint it without the extremely racist beliefs by William Rimmer. But he was a great artist, understood art. But I just want to add that note, and let's just take a look at this, because this is about art, not about beliefs. I just wanted to add that information for you. So, William Rimmer is very famous for, if you've ever seen the Led Zeppelin logo, like with the angel, that's William Rimmer. I'll put a picture of it up just in case you're not familiar. This is a Dover book. I don't believe it's in print anymore. I believe the reason why it's not in print is probably because the absurd beliefs in it, but there is some really useful information here. So we're going to take a look at this. I do love William Rimmer's style. I think he's very stylistic, and I love the way he draws anatomy and kind of gives you a lot of bumps, but in a very simplistic way. Use a lot of lines to represent bumps, but it's like lines that, there's a lot of thick and thin ink lines going on. He's just was a very, just a certain type of artist who I do enjoy his very interesting style that he has. Now, he goes over things like the head being raised, the head being lowered, things like the axis, how you move that center line up, if you move it down. Very important stuff if you want to become an artist, and it's stuff that sort of is so obvious as you get better, but as you're learning, it's very useful information. Sorry, I'm trying to move the cord around. Great. Hold on 1 second. I'll have to edit that out. So yeah, I mean, it's useful information like that, like how the axes work. Again, it's very obvious when you are sort of a artist who understands what's going on, but in the beginning, it sort of doesn't make a lot of sense, so you're trying to understand it. We do very interesting things like the head being tilted. This is the kind of stuff I was talking about, which is not cool. So we'll kind of just breeze right over that. We get things like eyes and proportion of the head, and how the eyes work, how the eye sockets work. Mouths, very important. How some protrude, some go in. How the lip, the bottom lip may overlap, the top lip may overlap. Interesting stuff like that, and I love drawings like this. Just so much cool detail going on there. Very confident lines, but it seems so sketchy when you take a look at it. It seems like He's doing a lot of sketch work there. This is a book that I picked up probably within the past 2 years, and I'd seen William Rimmer's work before. I don't know if he was a teacher more so than he was an artist. I think he was a doctor, actually, and I think he's a doctor who just drew, and he was a very talented artist. Again, controversial in his beliefs, unacceptable in his beliefs, but damn good artist. Nobody's perfect. He goes over things like beards, how hair flows. Just really cool stuff. We go over the comparison of female heads and infant heads, or skulls. Median lines, very important, where things are placed. I mean, obviously we have things like the Loomis head now, which is, you know, everybody's go-to when it comes to studying art or studying how to draw the head. But you know, having a little information like this is important. This, I would say, is a great book to have with like your Michael Hamptons, your Andrew Loomises, your Mike Matteses, your Glenn Vilppu, who was my favorite art teacher. But I really love the style here. It's so cool. And I will look at this book sometimes and kind of try to emulate the lines, because I really like he shows like expressions, and he just puts a lot of lines and how lines and the muscles of the face. So you can just use like very simple lines to kind of express an expression. So I really enjoy stuff like that. The head tilting back, very important stuff, like interesting stuff. I enjoy when you kind of get different things, because here's the thing: if you want to become an artist and you want to learn to be an artist, there is not going to be one book that's going to work for everything. So you kind of have to become like a book hoarder and a video hoarder. Like, you have to look at multiple videos and multiple, you got to have 5 perspective teachers if you're doing this on your own. If you're going to like classes and stuff, you should still have other teachers and mentors if you can, but there's no one way of doing things. There's a million different ways. I mean, there's the Riley method, there's Vilppu's method, which I think is my favorite. There's just so many methods to becoming an artist, and once you get that understanding of how forms work and stuff like that, then it's like, well, I need to have some kind of path in which I can go down if I want to kind of have my own style. And Rimmer is one of those guys who, he had a very like Renaissance-y type style, and he was around in the 1800s. So it's kind of like he was trying to bring back that classic feeling, but he also has, I don't know, just a interesting style. But I don't think he was an artist first. I think he was a doctor first. But yeah. Alright. And then we get to the skeleton, going over the rib cage, where all, the clavicles, all the different bones, very important stuff. Sometimes when you're studying anatomy, you kind of have to sit on pages like this. When I was starting to draw, I would say to myself, well, how long do I have to spend on each page? And there are sometimes pages that you'll sit on for months, kind of understanding what's going on. That's totally okay. You're not going to remember all this stuff. It's not even that important to remember all this stuff, but you should kind of have a base or a surface idea, like what a humerus looks like, what an ulna looks like. These are things that you need to kind of have a somewhat of an understanding of. But the great thing about being an artist is you don't have to remember every single bone. You just have to remember the bones that have anything to do with art. Well, what are those bones? It's usually the landmarks, and there are books that teach you what landmarks are. But if you are an artist or an established artist, you already understand this. So, but if you're not, hopefully this is helpful to you. He goes over gestures for a little bit. There's not a lot of gesture in this book, which is kind of one of the downfalls. So you obviously would need a gesture book. I would advise getting many, many books before getting this book. But the good thing about this book is it's actually quite cheap to get secondhand. So if you want to pick it up, I think I picked mine up for like $15 or something. But there's some interesting stuff in gesture here. Very simple gesture. He's using like boxes or cubes. But man, I love that style. There's just like, that's what I mean. Like I love the lines that he uses. And the funny thing is there's not a lot of line weight going on there. It seems like he just uses a very, when he adds a line that isn't as bold, it really kind of sometimes speaks louder than the lines that are very bold, if that makes any sense. Because they're not as frequent. Hands, how the scapula works, how it's kind of its own thing that comes off of the rib cage. When I started drawing, I thought that was a part of the rib cage. It's not. I mean, again, if you're an artist, or established artist, this is very obvious stuff. But when you're learning, this stuff is really confusing, and you have to kind of like, you're spinning, 10 plates, you're juggling, 10 balls at once, trying to understand how art works. It's very difficult, but just like some little information. I mean, I remember picking up Burn Hogarth, who I don't particularly, I don't really like his figure drawing, the way he teaches figure drawing, but when he explained how the leg works and how there's like a B shape and an S shape, it really kind of made a lot of sense to me. So sometimes you'll pick up a book and there'll be like one piece of information that will work for you, and then the rest of it will just be like, I don't need any of this. So, but I mean, there's things like just understanding the scapula is separate of the rib cage is huge, if you're learning to be an artist. So kind of like they're like shoulder pads, and that's something that I figured out well into my understanding of art and anatomy. Great drawings of legs. There are books that do legs better. Again, this is more of like a reference thing, or a book that, you can, I mean, it's a reference book in my opinion, but it's a very cool one. Goes over the foot. Goes over things like the, how the leg is arched, or the bottom of the leg, the ankle is kind of arched in the way that you would not think it is. It's like little things like that. Super important stuff that you're not going to see. It may take you 100 times, 1,000 times until it ends up making sense, where kind of a light bulb goes off in your head. So, yeah. Going over the neck and shoulders, man, difficult area of the body. Everybody talks about the face being difficult. The neck and the shoulders, really difficult part of the body to draw, because there's so much going on there, He even goes over the muscles where everything connects, and then draws a great arm. So much going on there. So many muscles going into each other, lines going into each other. Just, when you're learning to be an artist, it ain't easy. But then he goes over things like how the bicep works and where it connects. Super important stuff. You can get any anatomy class on any like website for like $10, and they'll teach you something like that. But sometimes it's nice to visualize it and see it. Yeah, love the style. I'm here for the style. Some of the information is important, and like I said, some of it is just not cool, and I do not agree with. Muscles of the back, I mean, I've seen this in like a million anatomy books, but how the arm, what happens with the arm raised. You get some anatomy books where you don't see this, and this is kind of cool, showing you where the muscles kind of go in as you lift the limb. Important stuff. I tried to figure that out with like the foreshortening. Going back, I used a little pencil to get there. Stuff like that. Foreshortening, when a form goes back, it's really difficult, so you're trying to figure out how those cylinders look. Man, just great drawings though. Beautiful drawings. He drew very like sometimes he drew very like large, stocky figures. How the pelvis works, the male pelvis versus the female pelvis, that there's actually a difference in. So yeah, obviously female pelvis more wide than the male pelvis because you know, the whole birth thing. Even goes over the axis, how things like move, how you can move the waist or the pelvis. Very important. Legs. You know, very absurd figure there. But yeah, great stuff. And then we go over things like proportions. Proportions is one of those things where I'm happy that it's, by the way, it's at the end of the book, because I don't think proportions are that important. It's one of those things that as you get better as an artist, you'll start to see where you're not improving on, or where you're making your mistakes in proportions. I like the fact that it's at the end of the book, because it's kind of saying like, yes, this is important, but it's not as important as the rest of the information that's kind of that you're going to learn. And I absolutely agree with that. I think proportion is like, and he'll show you in this book like how you can have different proportions, different sizes of, you know, the arms or the shoulders and the pelvis. Proportion is one of those things where you can be creative with that. You can be creative with anatomy too, but you kind of have to have somewhat of an understanding of how things connect. But I mean, he's showing you that you can have different proportions. You can have a skinnier proportion, a wider proportion, a broader proportion, a narrow, so on and so forth, because that stuff changes. I like this too, like how the stance is. You know, how you can be more leaned back, more up straight. You can be creative with that. I tend to like to have a little bit of a curve. I think of things, because I look at some of the comics that I really enjoy, like especially underground comics or outlaw comics. There's a lot of this going on. It's very obvious when you see it. It doesn't look very balanced. It looks very odd. It looks very stiff. So he kind of is showing you like, you know, you can kind of be creative with it, but you sort of want to be somewhere in the range of, you know, that chin lining up with those feet. That's where you want to be, because if they're not, they're going to feel off balanced. It's just not going to work. I don't think he goes over balance on this. I wish he would, but he doesn't. He shows a difference of, you know, you can change the head size, like a larger head, smaller head, female proportions, super important. He even goes over drawings of infants and children, you know, just in case you ever need to draw children or infants. Great female drawings. Kind of reminds me of Albert Dürer a bit, who I'm a huge fan of. And yeah, and then kind of you get into this very interesting, a lot of lines. A guy who really loved to put lines on his figures, which, you know, I dig that a lot. But yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of line weight going on there, I feel like sometimes. But actually there is, so never mind. I already said that anyways. He shows you things like, you know, characters bending over. He kind of gives you an idea of foreshortening as well. Foreshortening is super important. When you're trying to understand foreshortening, it's a very difficult skill. You tend to think that you draw the figure the same way every time, and that just isn't true when you're talking about foreshortening. Obviously, the way foreshortening works, if you're not familiar or you're still trying to understand it, always draw the thing that is the closest and the largest. We always go from big to small. I tend to make this mistake too, where I'm drawing something that's foreshortened, and I always start with the head, and it's like, oh shit. It's like, start with what's going on, and then kind of gesture sort of goes out the window sometimes with foreshortening. There is sort of a gesture going on here, but you kind of need to think about form before you think about gesture when it comes to foreshortening. Very difficult stuff. I mean, obviously you still think about gesture, but there is gesture in it, but the form kind of takes, you know, is the part that you need to kind of focus on. Whatever, anyways. But yeah, this is just a cool anatomy book, very of its time. Printed by Dover. I don't think it's in print anymore because it's controversial beliefs that I will say again, I do not agree with. But it was a different time, still not acceptable, but the actual anatomy stuff going on, the proportions and kind of how things work with like movement. I mean, it's important stuff that you need to learn, and my advice to anybody who's trying to learn to be an artist, try to pick up as much as you possibly can, even if it's controversial. Because you never know if there's going to be one bit of information in the book that you pick up. If you see this on the street somewhere, or if you see it online or something like that, and it's like under $10 or under $15 or whatever, I would advise just pick it up. Not everything is important in this book, but there is some really important information. And I really dig William Rimmer as an artist. Yeah, it's just a cool book. So I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah.